Here's the bait, here's the fish. His mouth, I mean, he can swallow it this way, but he was hungry enough to try. What's up, fellow fishing fanatic? This spring morning, I'm at the pond fishing from the bank. Let's see which lure works best. So I'm gonna start things off with my favorite lure, a crankbait. Now I've got several different versions that I'm gonna test out and see which one's gonna work best today. Starting with this medium diver, and then I might switch to a square bill crankbait. And then if I'm feeling crazy, I might even switch to the hybrid hunter. And lastly, if I'm still not getting any bites, I'm gonna switch to a lipless crankbait. Now, as you can see, the water's kind of clear, kind of murky. Probably about 6 to 8 inches of visibility, maybe a foot tops. This pond's just a muddy bottom. I put a lot of rock around the edges to try to help give the fish some kind of structure to cling to. I'm not exactly sure what the water temperature is, but I do know that today's high is about 70 degrees, and the last few days have been about 70 degrees. So I'm gonna guess that the water temperature is getting in the mid to upper 50s because we're still having some pretty cool cold nights. So the bass should be in pre-spawn mode. Now, I've started on the calm side with the lure that I just don't think's gonna quite cut it today. So I've already handicapped myself from the beginning, but hopefully that just means it gets better as we keep going. With that said, let's move on down to the other side of the pond. As you can tell, there is a little bit of wind. My app said a maximum of 8 miles an hour. I don't know that I fully believe that right now, but it is what it is. Oh, there's one right there. He was on that log. Heck yeah. Whoop whoop. A lot shallower than I expected. Just like that, our first fish. Not a giant, but pretty good one for this little pond. They're all about that size, a little smaller. Trying to weed some of them out. It's his lucky day, although he's probably big enough to keep a healthy population of. Fun to catch. So hey, for lure number one, crankbait number one, it's a success. Let's go see if we can switch up and catch another one. So lure number two is gonna be a square bill crankbait. You'll notice a theme in most of today's crankbaits. They're all gonna be this red, orange color. That's because it's one of the best colors for the spring. I actually interviewed some pros asking myths, and one of their myths was busting the fact that everybody believes that it's because the fish are eating crawfish that are typically red this time of year, and that's why they eat red. One of the pros doesn't believe that. He just believes, well, you'll have to watch the video. I'll link it right here to see what he believes. Let's take a couple casts over there with this one before we move spots. But he was behind that log. Nothing. All right, let's move spots. All right, we're getting into the good side now. Couple things. One, fishing the bank that the wind is blowing into like this is always the best option until it's not. And the times that it's not are typically when it's just crazy windy, and they call it blowing it out, which means that the water is just getting stirred up so much the fish get disoriented and don't know, where they're at in that muddy, nasty water. But on a small pond like this, that's pretty rare. So typically if you're fishing a pond, fishing the wind-blown bank is going to be best. The other thing, as I take off the garbage from it, and that's actually a good thing, is you want to be hitting the ground, hitting the bottom with your crankbait. If your crankbait is not hitting the bottom, it's not doing its job. I know to me it sounded weird for years. I hated that my crankbait would hit the bottom and get hung up, or hit the bottom and I'd bring back a bunch of junk. But honestly, I've gotten way more bites since I've started letting that crankbait drag along the bottom, hit stuff, ricochet, bounce off stuff. And it's just because it looks like a natural crawfish trying to get away from something, or an injured bait fish bouncing off and it is kind of disoriented and doesn't really know where it's going. So that's always good to keep in mind when fishing a crankbait. Now there are always exceptions, like a deep diving crankbait out in the middle of the lake or something, yes, but generally bounce it off the bottom, bounce it off structure, whatever you can. Really thought this one would be the ticket, to be honest. Oh, tricked me. Yeah, I think it was another stickfish. Well, I guess it's broke off. Somebody doesn't know how to tie a knot. That'd be me. Hey, there it is. Good deal. It came back up. So for the longest time, I fished with a medium power fast action rod, and I caught fish using a crankbait with it. This last year, I switched over to a crankbait specific rod, and it's made a world of difference. I'm not ripping the hook out of the bass's mouth anymore, and I can cast this one a lot farther because it's a longer rod than my like 6'6" or whatever it was. And overall, I've just liked fishing with this rod a lot better than what I used to fish with. This is a Lew's American Hero 7-to-1. It's not an expensive reel by any means. I think I got this one for like $79 to $100, somewhere around there. And I've had it for several years now. I really, really like it. And that's because I tend to fish fast and I like fishing fast. So this 7-to-1 fits my style of fishing, but you might want to step down to, like I said, a 6-to-1 or a 5-to-1 to get the full effect out of your crankbaits. All right. So after further checking, it was not my knot that broke, thank goodness. It was just the line itself. Must have had a nick in it or just set the hook too hard and it was hung up, but thankfully I got the lure back and I've retied a hybrid hunter, or this is actually the Bass Pro grass tracker. They're essentially the same type of lure, the same lure, but you'll notice that it is a very funky looking crankbait slash wake bait slash I don't know what all they really designed it off of, but there you go. That bill is bent flat at a 90 and then comes back. I've actually caught some big fish with it out of this very pond, so maybe this is the lucky tool for the day. It's different than a crankbait in the sense that it can be fished in different areas. As the name suggests, grass tracker for Bass Pro Shops or the hybrid hunter, it's a hybrid bait and it can be fished through grass a lot more effectively than a traditional crankbait, even though it has treble hooks and everything. Also, this one, you're really not gonna typically get it down to the bottom and hit all the structure down on the bottom, unless you're just fishing it in a foot to 2 foot, maybe. I mean, it really doesn't dive that deep. But honestly, that makes it perfect for ponds like this, where it's max 10, 12 foot, depending on how much water's in the pond at the time. And most of it's in that, 5 foot range tops. Keep them moving on down the bank. We should be in the juiciest spots. We'll see if it actually works out now. Now you will notice that this bait is the biggest that I will be throwing today. And that might be discouraging some of the fish that it passes from biting it just because of how big it is. There's a lot of small fish in this little pond. Oh, just kidding, right when I say that, that's a better fish though. He ain't a giant at all, but he sure fought like he was bigger than that. Just like that. Fish number 2, he's a lot smaller. That's mostly what's in here. I mean, shoot, I don't think he could get that thing in his mouth. Let's compare. Here's the bait, here's the fish. I mean, he can swallow it this way, but he was hungry enough to try. Alrighty, so that was a success on lure number 3. So we've had only one that I couldn't get bit on. And I think if I would have fished it down this stretch, I might have got that bite, but I guess we'll never know. Now, unlike the first bite that was off of wood and in really shallow, this one was fairly shallow. This bank is a little steeper, but he was kind of just out cruising on this muddy bank. You can see right here, there's a concrete chunks out in front of me that I put as riprap, but right where he bit, there was nothing as far as structure goes. There's another one. Oh, he came off. Well, we might have found the ticket. He was off of the structure too. Honestly, that smaller lipless crankbait might be the ticket. just because this is so big, they're having a hard time getting it in their mouth. I do keep hitting something right out here, and I think that's where those 2 bites have come from, but it just feels like the muddy bottom because I'm not bringing up any grass on my hooks and I'm not getting hung up. It's just I'm hitting the bottom. The problem was it fixed itself. Oh, that's why. Alrighty. All right, let's move on to the last lure. See if we can't catch anything on a lipless crankbait. I really think this could be the ticket. I don't know that we're just gonna hammer them today, but get a couple bites with it. There are several different types of lipless crankbaits. There's the floating lipless crankbaits, there's the suspending lipless crankbaits, and then there's the sinking lipless crankbaits. This one, I'm not sure. Let's see. It's a sinking. So obviously, if you want to fish it in shallow water, get yourself a floating one. You need to fish it a little deeper, a sinking one like this will work. And then if you need to hit those middle depths, that suspending is going to be your ticket. In a small pond like this, it's never a bad idea to go back over the areas that you've already fished with a different lure. Number one, new fish have already moved into that area. Number two, maybe the fish in that area just weren't wanting the lure that you were presenting at the time. Now that you've changed, they like whatever lure you're throwing. Now, with me today, I'm not throwing that much different lures, so more than likely, it's not gonna get them to bite, but like I said, it's always worth a shot. I mean, what do you have to lose? One thing I didn't talk about with my setup is what line I'm using. And I'm sure you can hear it as I reel. This braid is rubbing against my eyes and it's kind of annoying, I'm not gonna lie. But I have not found anything that casts as good as braid, is as strong as braid, and so I like to use braid with a fluorocarbon leader. So if I just went straight braid, and I've tried it in the past, it's kind of a pain because straight braid ends up getting tangled around on the treble hooks. It's just too flexible, too flimsy for a crankbait. And so you end up spending more time getting those hooks undone and getting your line off of the hooks than you do fishing. Whereas this fluoro is a lot stiffer, and so it doesn't get wrapped around my hooks nearly as often. And the fluoro sinks, and the fluoro is invisible in the water. Now, in muddy water like this, I really don't think the visibility thing matters, but in clear water, it definitely does. So that's my line setup that I like to use when fishing pretty much any crankbaits. As far as pound test goes, I think this is 30. Typically 30 to 50 is what I use. And then 10 to 12 fluoro is about as maximum as I go. This might even be an 8, how easily it broke earlier. Kind of. All right, the last tip that I'm gonna offer is changing your reel speed. Now we talked about we want to be feeling the bottom with most of these crankbaits, and that is true, but sometimes it's not true. Like, that's the beauty of fishing. I can say one thing that's true most of the time and then go out the next day and it's completely not true, and I have, you know, it made me a liar, because sometimes the fish just want it a little bit slower or a little bit faster. You know, I mentioned earlier that I fish fast, so typically what's best for me is to cast it, let it sink, and then start reeling back slowly, because when I first get to the water, I'm all jacked up, ready to go fishing. I cast it and I just start burning it back to me. And most of the time, that's not what the fish are looking for. They're wanting something slower. And so it goes with, you know, having a faster reel. If you've got a faster reel, you might need to slow way down. If you've got a little slower reel, maybe you can speed up a little bit. But changing up that reel speed will help you, I promise. So we talked a lot about how to fish a crankbait, but we didn't talk anything about how to rig it, how to tie it on, how to adjust it. Sometimes crankbaits don't run straight and you've got to figure out how to adjust it. That video is down below me right now, and you definitely need to check it out before you start fishing crankbaits. That way you get started correctly.